This is the Go Maluku podcast.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Ghazali Urella here. This is becoming a thing, actually. I've been uploading the episodes of the Green Room every day to the podcast, and I come to notice that I start every episode with "What's up, everyone?" So I really have to find something that is a little bit different. I could start with Indigenous greetings, of course. I could do that as well. But this is something that I just rolls off the tongue, I believe. What's up, everyone? So that's what I come to realize. Right, this is a couple of seconds before we went live. Anyway, here you go. I wanted to say what's up, everyone. Say that again. Greetings, respectful greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. The Green Room, where we just do a quick recap of today's session of the Perm Forum on Indigenous Issues. We have arrived at day 6. Yesterday was a day of rest and recuperation, I would say. There were a lot of side events, though, and some very interesting ones. You have to realize that, or you have to know that I think this is also the first session, because it is virtual, that I think there's a higher number of side events registered and not registered that have to deal, that are happening in the margins of the Perm Forum, but also during the Perm Forum. There are some side events that are happening while the session is ongoing. So for the people that have missed out on the session today because of a side event or were at work, which is super understandable. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I'll try to recap with you. If you have a thought or something, then please join the conversation. Carson, thank you so much for leaving a comment. Really appreciate it, man. You're doing a lot of great things. So people that are watching, Carson Kibuto, or listening, follow this guy. There's a lot of good things that he's posting or doing as well. Anyway, what was I going to say? All right, yeah, day 6 already of the Perm Forum on Indigenous Issues. Mind you, tomorrow is a closed session, so there's no Perm Forum. So there are a high number of side events, though. So I recommend you to consult the Perm Forum website on any side events that you might interest you. Also, I want to get this out of the way. Tonight at 7 p.m., I believe, there's a side event where I will be speaking on the enhanced participation process. We've talked about it at length on the Green Room on last Friday, and a little bit on the Green Room on Tuesday. And I will be speaking during that side event organized by the Temporary Committee for Indigenous Peoples on the enhanced participation process and the Government of Canada. So that is, I believe, 7 p.m. for New York, Ottawa time. For me, that will be 1 a.m. So which will be fun, because I know there are people that are a little bit worse off. A good friend, obviously, Tuomo Saslak Yuso, it will be 2 a.m. for him. And a good friend as well, Daria Egereva from the Russian Federation, or from the Russian region, I should say. It's a little bit later than that. But a super interesting side event. So a shameless plug, if you will, for that side event. If you can, please join us. I would really, like people to know about the enhanced participation process that is currently ongoing. Anyway, I promise you to keep it short, crisp, brief, so that you can continue on with your day. So let's get right to it. I made some. So what I usually do during the session, I do a lot of multitasking. So that's why I bought a 27-inch TV screen, a computer screen, so that I can multitask. So I watch the feed, the session itself. I take notes, and along the side, I do a lot of my own work that I have to do as well. So I took some notes from things that I believe that stood out from today's conversation at the Perm Forum on Indigenous Issues. As you know, it's all virtual, hopefully an anomaly. And today we discussed item 4, which is a continuing agenda item at the Permanent Forum. It is a discussion on the 6 mandated areas of the Permanent Forum. For the trivia buffs out there, I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about, all right, which are the 6 mandated areas? No. All right. So it is the economic and social developments, culture, environment, education, health, and of course, human rights. So those are the 6 mandated areas of the Perm Forum that it advises the Economic and Social Council on in its work, because the Perm Forum is a subsidiary body to the Economic and Social Council. So this is all within the reference of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is the basis of all the engagements and all the work that the 3 UN mandates, particularly on Indigenous peoples, deal with. So yeah, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So the Permanent Forum continued with that discussion, and it highlighted, or it also overlapped with a thematic dialogue on the newly proclaimed or declared International Decade of Indigenous Languages, which will kick off in 2022. So that's next year, for 10 years until 2032. It was obviously before the decade, there was an International Year of Indigenous Languages. So there was a lot of discussion about that. Topic of today is Indigenous languages. What you should know, and then let me kick off with an observation and a little bit of reflection. I would say is that when Indigenous peoples take the floor, we highlight the gaps, the shortcomings of the policies that the states are imposing or deploying, the gaps and the problems that these policies create. States, on the other hand, they show, or they tell, and which is a little bit of a show and tell show as well, is that they explain what they're doing so far, what challenges they're overcoming, like look what we are doing, and what would have happened if we did not do anything. So there's a disconnect, obviously, and there should be disconnect. Otherwise, there's no Permanent Forum. It is a place where you can highlight or expose the disconnect between the national actions of a government over state versus the needs and the requirements of Indigenous peoples to have, for example, in this case, the exercising the right to speak their own language, but it is more than that. Indigenous language, it is, and I think the representative of the Congrès Mondial Amazigh, so that is the Worldwide Congress of the Amazigh Indigenous Peoples of Northern Africa, from Morocco to Libya, and a little bit down to Burkina Faso and the Canary Islands as well. The Amazigh Indigenous peoples, the representative, I think it all summed up by saying that language is as important to Indigenous peoples as land, territories, and resources. So that that it is not just a side thought or a topic that is as a dessert to the main course, but it is part of the main course. It's one of the main ingredients for Indigenous not only survival, but also the ability to prosper and to thrive actually in this world. Language is super important. It's a database of knowledge. It is and in the conversations of the intervention that Indigenous peoples presented, it all highlighted that was the red line. What this representative of the Congrès Mondial Amazigh also showcased was that states should change the way they view and treat the languages of the languages and the language and the people the language belongs to. I think that is an important issue, important thing to note as well. That language is not a isolated thing. That is part of a culture. It's part of a people's. So you need to treat the language well, but you also need to treat the peoples well. And it's not just the language and the peoples, but it's also the lands, territories, and resources, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a very holistic thing. Approach, if you will, in terms of protecting and preserving indigenous peoples through the rights of indigenous peoples, and also a overarching red line was that indigenous peoples need to be seen as partners and not as adversaries. Again, the words of the representative from the Congrès Mondial Amazigh, and that I think that's his statement, even it came at a very his timing was very well, because it came a little bit at the end, was a little bit of a recap of the conversation of the what has been discussed in all these interventions that were given. Obviously, there are some interventions that spark a little bit of a discussion or spark a little bit of deepening the conversation. For example, Finland, on behalf of the Nordic states, obviously highlighted the need for protection and preservation of indigenous cultures through very different ways, a whole host of ways, including the enhanced participation process of indigenous peoples' representative institutions to add or to increase the resiliency of indigenous peoples. People are approaching this from different sides, all adding up to the recap statement of this representative of the CMA. Some of the highlights, I would say, was two main takeaways that I would like to discuss today. Is that one, the overarching topic or subject that is the undercurrent of everything is self-determination. Some really highlighted in their conversations and their interventions. Others allude to it. Others imply self-determination. But you can see across the board that there's, from indigenous side, there's an importance to have to have the right to self-determination. And as I mentioned before, there was a disconnect, or like in these sessions, you can notice a disconnect. For example, the representative of the Indigenous Peoples Organizations of Australia, it's a network of Indigenous Peoples Organizations, highlighted the Australia's failure to protect Aboriginal sacred sites. And in the intervention, it was claimed that the native title that was for Aboriginal Australian Aboriginal Indigenous peoples does not enable self-determination or free prior from consent, meaning that there are extractive industries that are now in Australia, and the indigenous peoples do not have the opportunity or are not the right to free prior from consent is not respected to refuse a mining operation to occur on the lands. Obviously, that's happening all across the world. What is so significant in that intervention was she started off with a little bit about, obviously, the disproportionate incarceration of Aboriginal Indigenous people, Aboriginal Australian people in Australia. A few speaking slots after that, the government of Australia took the floor, first acknowledging that of the the disproportionate number of Indigenous peoples in incarceration, in incarceration, and I think, and I'm paraphrasing, that it's time to be honest about it, and meaning that it's time to address it. And she highlighted like she touched upon a small portion of the bigger statement of the Indigenous Peoples Organizations of Australia. And then instead of going into addressing the concerns of the IPO, the representative of Australia went into talking about economic and business empowerment, and et cetera, et cetera. Talked at length. Well, as far as at length you can talk about it in 2 minutes, but not addressing the right to self-determination of Aboriginal and Torres Islander people. So that's a little bit of disconnect. What the intent is, and I think that's what the state's vantage point of angle should be, is to take the floor, however, to respond to the concerns of Indigenous peoples, instead of raising issues that might put you into a little better limelight. However, the whole permanent forum, or the whole platform of the United Nations, of the international community, is meant to be, and I'm sorry, it's not meant to be, but it's how Indigenous peoples use it, as in like addressing the challenges, the problems that we face, and that the solutions that are required to address the remedy or fix these problems. So I think that was a significant thing that stood out, was what the reality is of the dialogue versus what the dialogue should be. And you could see that throughout the conversation. Another important point was obviously when we talk about language, and I'll go a little bit deeper into that in a bit, was raised by the International Indian Treaty Council, the urgent intervention, and I like that. I like the fact that you use the agenda item to present an urgent action. That urgent intervention or awareness is required to raise an issue that is currently undergoing or is about to happen. Obviously, there are treaty bodies that you can turn to. However, this is an opportunity, and when you have the floor, and you should make use of your 2 minutes to raise an issue that is super important to you. The urgent intervention was regarding the missing and murdered Indigenous women. You can call it an epidemic that's happening right now in the United States and Canada. The call is for the protection of the human rights, treaty rights, environmental rights, and Indigenous rights on missing and murdered Indigenous women. Access to justice obviously is so super important. Obviously, what is happening right now, if you follow the news, the new Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, she established a unit within the U.S. State Department, or within the U.S. government, to and I should say this correctly, a federal unit within the Bureau of Indian Affairs to deal with the missing and murdered Indigenous women. That's happening. Too late, obviously, but better too late than never. But there's obviously there's a lot more things you can that one can do, because there's an epidemic that's not only happening on a state side of the U.S. side of the world, but of Turtle Island, but also on the Canadian side of Turtle Island. So you need to have some supranational project, or not project, but some monitoring and some ideas, and or I'm looking for the right word on this one, influence initiative. That's the word that I was looking for. So that to address this issue, that was happening. That was something that stood out. Also, all right, let's go back a little bit to the International Year for Indigenous Languages. That was sorry, no, we're gearing up for the International Decade on Indigenous Languages. What the International Year of Indigenous Languages did is Indigenous peoples urging all actors, like getting all actors ready, starting to set the agenda, raise awareness, and segueing into the decade on Indigenous languages. Bringing urgent steps, I would say, to national, international, or local level policies. In this case, language policies. So that is briefly what the International Year as well as the decade is geared towards. For more about this, obviously, I had a podcast episode with Alexei Tikarev a couple of weeks ago. I highly recommend you to listen to that one, because he talks at length about like the work that not only himself but also Indigenous peoples and in general put into it, the idea behind it, and how they came about with it, how you come up with let's do an international year, and then segue into like, all right, let's do an international decade. There's a lot of thought and consideration that goes behind it that I cannot even comprehend to start to mention in this short episode, and which is also a shameless plug to listen to my podcast. Bing! Thank you. Anyway, so the aim of the decade of Indigenous languages is to strengthen Indigenous languages. Indigenous languages are disappearing, dying, some would say, but it's super important to strengthen, revitalize Indigenous languages, and through many means. That there are, in the interventions that were highlighted, there were several initiatives that Indigenous peoples have started all around the world to start this process. However, this needs to be amplified. It's smart, and that's what I like. Instead of like going big, you start small, and then you start to scale it. Instead of like big, and then you hit nothing. I would say that start small, a small program, a small school or curriculum idea or initiative. Start small and then scale it, so that it is better than doing the other way around, I would say. In terms of making something sustainable and longer lasting, the idea should always be to have a national consistency all throughout the country, 100%. But you do need to start small, and you need to start somewhere. There's a fine line between perfection and procrastination, and if you want to do big, you want to do professional. However, you lean towards procrastination, and if anything that we need right now as Indigenous peoples all around the world, it is action. And I'm not talking about like radical protests and everything. I'm talking about action in terms of claiming languages, revitalizing languages, using languages, reforming education systems. I think the Inuit Circumpolar Council talked about it, that using an Indigenous language is an act of self-determination, and I cannot agree more with that. And the Inuit right now, they're exploring their own institutions, including education institutions in Indigenous languages, to decolonize their education system, all the systems, by introducing Indigenous languages. And I think that is something that we should keep an eye on, and also to try to model all around the world for Indigenous peoples. You have, for example, the Indigenous language nests that are happening in Sapmi, in northern Scandinavia, the Kohangareo in Aotearoa, New Zealand, a small language nest where Indigenous peoples can learn their own language. And that's something that I would highly recommend Indigenous peoples all around the world to keep on exploring, and starting small and scaling it to a certain extent, that it becomes global and that you can link it with other initiatives, domestically, regionally, but also internationally. That in short was I think the gist of Indigenous languages. What we saw also was some interesting states that took the floor. Cuba, for example. I think Cuba is one of the a interesting partner when it comes to human rights and the rights of Indigenous peoples. Silent, however, an interesting one. So I'm glad that the Cuban government took the effort, the initiative to address this agenda item, or address the perm form at all in general. That was discussed today. Something else that I would like to point out. Oh yeah, obviously the end of the perm forum today was on the regional dialogues. So leading up to the perm forum this year, the expert members and the secretary, they hosted regional dialogues, and there was a general observations that were made from all the different regional conversations. For example, in North America, one of the topics that were highlighted was the inadequate access to education for Indigenous children and youth. There was also a reference to, or a observation, that Indigenous peoples that are impacted by climate change, that the recognition or protection of self-determination and land rights is a top priority, and participation in decision making is important. Also, the recognition or the observation that Indigenous people's knowledge systems should be utilized when it comes to fighting climate change, fighting desertification, fighting the loss of biodiversity, and looking at 2025. It is which is a milestone. It should increase programs through like UN funds and programs to greater realization of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, human rights, and self-determination. Also, what was highlighted in these regional dialogues was the recognition of lands, territories, and resources, which continues to be an important topic for Indigenous peoples. And again, it goes to self-determination. And again, it goes to free power from consent. Quick side note, and I don't, we might go a little bit into overtime on this one, is I see Indigenous peoples more and more talking about free power from consent protocols, talking more and more about free power from consent. I would submit that free power from consent, and based on my own observations, my own examination of free power from consent under the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as the ILO Convention 169, there's some differences between the two, which invites cherry picking by states. That is one, but something that I would like to make Indigenous peoples super aware of is that free power from consent is with a lack of a very diplomatic word about on it. Let me just put it out there, is that free power from consent is a watered down version of the right to self-determination. It derives from the right. Sorry, I should say it is a manifestation of self-determination, meaning that self-determination is the right that one you should claim. You don't ask for a self-determination; you claim for it. You claim it. Second, self-determination is the framework. It is the backbone. It is the skeleton of all rights that are enshrined in not only in the Declaration, but there's a reason why self-determination is in Article 1 of the UN Charter. There's a reason why self-determination is in Articles 1 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Meaning that it is the backbone, it is the foundational principle, it is the mothership. Sorry, I like science fiction. It's a mothership of rights, and it is super important that as Indigenous peoples that we keep on pushing for self-determination. Free prior informed consent is okay. However, there's a lot of, you can already hear free prior informed consent, free prior informed consideration, and people don't have different understandings of what free prior informed consent is. So take it a little bit one step back to the origin, the right to self-determination. So I'm not saying that free prior informed consent is bad. I'm just saying that it is high time that we put self-determination front and center. And you can already see it in all these interventions of Indigenous peoples. And yesterday, not yesterday, but like the last week as well. There's a some say it out loud up front, and some say it or imply it or allude to it. But self-determination is something that I see that Indigenous people should be putting more on front and center on the agendas. So that is, I would say, the overarching what has been discussed at the Perm Forum on Indigenous issues today. So we have just a quick recap, and I think that is it, because I don't want, because the more that I think about it, the more I will expand on it, and I think I want to give you like the gist of it, like the highlights of it. First of all, languages. Languages is as important to Indigenous peoples as land, territories, and resources. The states should treat languages as well as Indigenous peoples. It should change the way. It should change the way it treats languages and Indigenous peoples. And there's also on so many ways. Yet that's why you hear all these interventions that there are so many different Indigenous peoples, and all these Indigenous peoples have different priorities. There needs to be a more profound or more direct or more meaningful action to support the importance and promote the importance of Indigenous languages, not only the languages but also the people. And also, Indigenous peoples need to be seen as partners and not as adversaries. And you can see that across the board in all conversations on all topics: sustainable development, climate change, biodiversity, desertification, language, obviously, human rights. It is the Indigenous peoples right now. It is we're trying to take away that fear that the states have, that they see us as adversaries and not as partners, whereas we want to be seen as partners. I think Miriam Wallet Abubakrin said it best, that Indigenous peoples engage with the UN not to complain but to contribute. I think that is a super important thing to highlight. And then finally, obviously, is the self-determination and the underlying, the undercurrent in all the contributions of Indigenous peoples today, and not only today, obviously, but also I would argue the last 30 years of, no, not 30 years, at least from 1977, when Indigenous peoples first, and the first meeting was held on within the Indigenous peoples. So tomorrow there's no open session of the Forum on Indigenous Issues. I think I covered most of it, and there are a lot of side events though. I'm not sure though if I'll come back with the Green Room tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon, New York time. Maybe I'll do some preliminary. I think I'll do that. Maybe a preliminary open the stage for a preliminary conclusion or observations of like the past 20th session of the Perm Forum. Do that in 30 minutes. Maybe that's a nice idea. And definitely the next session of the Perm Forum on Indigenous issues will be on Thursday, same time, 9 a.m. till 11 a.m. New York time. So that is 3 till 5 p.m. Geneva time. That is the agenda for that we have so far. I hope you enjoyed this short briefing, recap, rant, if you will, and looking forward to catching you on another episode. Everyone, have a great day, evening, night, or afternoon, and stay safe and stay healthy.